You're listening to the Accelerating Growth Reg A to M&A podcast, where we speak with the leaders in capital raise to the leaders in M&A and everyone in between. Your host is Roy Gatling. Let's get to the show.
All right, our guest today is Matt Genovese, founder and CEO of Planorama Design. They specialize in services targeted at the technology sector, and they've been doing some serious work with AI. So since every company I'm speaking with is either using AI or planning to, well, I thought, why not chat with someone that knows about it more than I do? So Matt, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir. It's really nice to be with you, Roy.
Great. Well, so let's get into our discussion on generative AI. Now, this is an area that you and your company have been doing some interesting work in. So what was the catalyst for that?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you a little bit of background. My company is called Planorama Design. As you said, we focus on software requirements and UX design for software products. And part of what we do is writing requirements, writing user stories, writing test cases, writing all of the information that normally product teams need, and developers and QA folks especially need in order to do their jobs. And so going back a little bit of time, we had been building out a product to help house that information. I like to say we put our money where our mouth is, and we decided to build this product management oriented product called Sinfonia to help aggregate requirements and really help product teams to be on the same page, to be the source of truth. Well, once AI came on the scene, and I'll tell you, I started back on GPT-2 a couple years ago when that was released as an open source product. And I started realizing like, oh boy, this is, really interesting capabilities. GPT-2, I did some training on it and I could see what it could generate. Once GPT-3 came out, started looking at it from the perspective of software requirements and user stories. And I started playing around and realizing that, this can help write user stories from product descriptions. And I started exploring it down that path. I explored a lot of other things too about AI. I mean, it's really just a nascent technology in terms of, how the commercial markets are figuring out how to use it and incorporate it. I went down the path of software requirements, and I realized that it could help with the definition of software requirements and help with the elaboration. And that was where our path went. And we started looking at it in all different types of ways to help us with that or addressing that particular problem.
That's great. Well, you mentioned ChatGPT 2 and so the early days. And I saw a recent post by you referencing ChatGPT 4 and essentially its capability, with regard to code and stuff like that. And you're a coder, right? You know this. And so just, briefly, I'd like to hear a little bit about that because I found it kind of interesting,
I'll tell you, my post, and it's the truth. I had been programming since a very young age. I was one of the kids in the 80s that grew up on the Commodore VIC-20 and the 64. And so I taught myself basic and assembly, and I knew and probably still can remember how to program in a lot of those languages. But the one that I missed the boat on was Python. And of course, that's the one to take off.
Figures, yeah.
And I kept looking back thinking, boy, I really should dedicate some time to learn that because it just looks like a really useful language. And I appreciated, as I saw the scripts coming out, like, oh, okay, this is really powerful. But I just never got around to it. And what ended up happening was I needed to, and I was working on a project on the side and doing some testing, and I needed to have some code written, and Python was the best language to use, but I didn't want to take the time to learn it. So I started going to GPT-4 and describing the problem, describing what I need, even giving it some of the example input files and the example output file that I needed. And by God, it started writing the code to do the translation, to do what I needed in that script. And many of the times it worked the first shot. I could paste it into Google Colab, run it, and it did it. Or I had to make some changes or some tweaks, but it was not in the code necessarily. It was in my description of the requirements of what I needed, refining that, honing that a bit. And it would, and GPT is very polite too. It'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Now I understand what you mean."
Right.
And then it came back with a revised version of the code. And I'll tell you, my jaw dropped sometimes, or I was laughing. It was like midnight, I was on my computer and my wife was in the bedroom next door and she must have heard me laughing because I couldn't believe what I'm watching as it's rewriting the code for me and apologizing for doing so. I ended up writing a set of scripts that did quite a bit of complex functionality for me. And I'll tell you, I didn't have to write any code from scratch. I did write some. I went in and tweaked as I figured out what I needed. And sometimes I was able to give it some guidance where I said, hey, you're trying to approach it this way. And I'm pretty sure there's a library that does this already for Python. I've heard of it, or I did some Googling. So it did help to have some programming knowledge and, things like that. But it would come back and said, oh, you're right. We can use that library. And it rewrote the entire script to make use of that library. And again, it worked. So it was just very impressive. And I can see the writing on the wall, and I think a lot of folks can, about where this is going to have an impact in software development.
Yeah, that's, well, clearly you and many others are on the right path here. I mean, I even fooled with it a little bit myself, just for some simple code it was Python code actually for some API work. And, and that worked out really well. And then I thought, well, I'm going to just test this against some relatively simple formulas like in Tableau and things like that, And I thought, okay, let's see. I'm going to go and do it. And then I'm going to ask it to do it. And it came back, in some cases, nearly identical to what I'd done, but in other cases, better, a more efficient way, I think. So I was like, what am I doing here? So I just use this tool.
I had instances where I was tweaking the code, or it gave me back sometimes it gave me back some code that didn't work, and that happened too.
Right.
And I would try it, and I would try tweaking it, and I couldn't get it to work. So I was like, hey, you know what? Before spending a lot of time, I'm going to paste it back in and just say, hey, here's my new set of code. I'm having this error. Can you tell me what's going on? Right. And it came back and would tell me, here's the problem, and it gave me the new code to fix it. And most of the time it worked.
Man. Well, let's kind of build on that, right? You mentioned, software development and things. So what are some of the other areas you think might be really promising for the use of this technology?
Well, so I will agree that software development is a big one, and not to get on that too much, but I think we might be underestimating how much that is going to make how much generative AI is going to make a difference.
Right.
Because right now, we think of software as something that takes, 3 to 6 months, a year to write, depending on the size of the application. And I think we're getting to a place, and I think it's not that far away, where we'll be able to guide the AI to do development, and it works 24/7. And with the right requirements and with the right, I'll say, methodology, employing the right methodology, software may not be out of our reach. It may cost, in the hundreds of dollars, in terms of using the OpenAI or the language model of whatever one we're using to generate a working application. And there are already projects doing this. So the fact that order of magnitude is going to change in terms of cost and time is going to make, I think, a very large impact on the technology sector and just what's possible. We as people, and probably you have had this too, where you think, oh boy, I'm having a particular problem, a challenge in business or whatever it is. I wish there was an app for that. I wish there was something for that. And then, we may spend, 30 seconds looking, and it's not worth it. And it leaves your mind. You're like, I'll just do it the manual way. I think in the future, there may be an opportunity where we're going to, or a change where we're going to have that thought come in and say, oh, I can just have it built for me. All right. And it will just go spawn off and go have it built, come back. And now you have your application that's very specific to whatever problem you're trying to solve. So, interestingly, from a user experience point of view, that's a great user experience. Not talking about the screen,
right?
And how it works, but I need a tool and it's made for me. I mean, what a fantastic UX, on the whole that becomes. So I think software development is in for a big change. And it's not just coding. It's also, I think I'm willing to bet that because UX design, and I mean designing the experience for the user, is based on a large body of work and heuristics, I think generative AI will play a part there, and have its day where it might actually create the screen designs and the workflows and everything for that application that it's already writing the back end code for. So I think there's opportunities there.
Yeah, that's
One of
I
them.
think I think we're on our way. I mean, I did a little bit of research on and saw some things on AutoGen, and
Mm-hmm.
essentially, right, those, call it ChatGPT talking to ChatGPT. You have to go off
Yeah.
and here are the requirements. Go code it, test it. You got any errors, you go back and fix it, retest it again. If it passes, okay, now go document it, and then ultimately
Mm-hmm.
deploy it. And it's like, dang. So pretty
That's exactly
amazing,
right.
and I think that speaks to what you were just talking about there. So
Well,
pretty awesome.
we have the ability right now to have these general purpose models like OpenAI's GPT-4, and it's been trained on a large set of data that obviously you don't have to just talk to it about coding, right? It's the ultimate person that happens to know everything, a bit about everything, and it does really well. But imagine when you get to the place where these models are now focused, smaller and focused on a
Right.
specific niche, right? And to the point where it can know and be trained on so much code that it can understand how to write Python really well, or JavaScript, or any language really well. They're already working on that with, say, Verilog for hardware description languages. My background was about half my career was in chip design, and you end up designing chips in terms of the logic, the functionality of that in a software language. It looks like a software language. It's called an HDL, a hardware description language, and Verilog is one of the primaries, and System Verilog for especially building the test benches around it. These AI application, or these language models right now can generate that, and I've tested it. And so now you're also moving into a place where you can use it to generate hardware and write, basically the descriptions for the logic in an ASIC, in an application-specific integrated circuit, or part of your larger design. So it's going to touch a lot of areas. I haven't even talked. I mean, the other one I was going to talk about was education, and I think it's going to play a part there. But
Yes.
This is a big deal,
Yeah.
and it's going to touch a lot of areas, and it's going to have a big impact on anyone it touches.
Well, regarding LLMs, right, these language models, have you done any comparisons on these? And I'm kind of interested in maybe
Sure.
latency, similarity of output, the cost, things like that.
Well, I haven't. I'll tell you, I've been focusing a lot on the commercial models coming from OpenAI. So GPT-3, ChatGPT, and then GPT-4. ChatGPT is often called 3.5 or 3.5 Turbo. So those models I've been looking at, and I'll tell you, I've been mainly using GPT-4 for the work that I do, and all that programming. That example I was telling you about before was using GPT-4. The other one that we have played around with, or I should say, not the other one, but the other category, are the open models. There's a lot of open models out there, and I'll tell you, 2023, if you were to look at it from the technology point of view, I would say it's the year of AI. And there are papers coming out. Sometimes, earlier this year, it seemed like every 6 hours there was a paper coming out from some major institution,
exactly,
talking about what they were discovering, finding in terms of training the models, ways to do it more efficiently. There's this way of doing it called QLoRa that reduced the training significantly, and how you can fine tune foundational models. And there's different ways of there are papers from Microsoft and so on. But where that had an impact was the open community, because they're reading the papers, or sometimes the ones reading or writing the papers are also producing their models out in the open source community. So we started really checking out some of those models and found that some of the I should say small models did a really good job at performing certain tasks, and you could run them on hardware that cost a couple $100 a month on rented hardware in the
Mm-hmm.
cloud, right?
Will it be
Now,
like Zephyr or something like that?
well, one of them that we were looking at was Falcon, the Falcon
Okay.
7,
Yeah, yeah.
Falcon 7 billion model.
Wow.
There
Because
were more that came out.
right. Yeah, I noticed that. I mean, after Llama 2, then there was the announcement on Falcon and additional parameters. Much larger. But anyway, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. Now, this was actually at the point we were testing this. Geez, it was about 3 or 4 months ago, and we were looking at that for Sinfonia.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is that we know that businesses who were going to be using Sinfonia or who wanted to put data into that platform may be a little concerned about sending it to OpenAI, having it go out to a third party commercial LLM vendor. So we said, well, let's look at these other models and do some verification of our own. And we found that some of the open models did a really good job. Now, it's on certain tasks, certain types of tasks, right? OpenAI is really good at what I'll say brainstorming, right? You want to give it some ideas or give it a set of challenges and have it go and think about possibilities. And because of the large training and the large network it has, it can really present back some fantastic ideas, especially in terms of software requirements. And we use that in Sinfonia. But there are other tasks that we might want to do. For example, querying your own project and asking questions about your own project that doesn't require the grandiose understanding of OpenAI to answer those questions. The data that it needs is within our database. And you can get by using smaller models that are running on localized hardware or in your own cloud. And then you're not bound by that per token cost, right? You're not having to pay a variable fee to OpenAI, which that's one of the challenges of these language models is the pricing model. You're paying per token. So it's almost like paying per word. And the problem is that if you're using it, you're providing value to your clients, and they're probably, getting value out of your product because of your use of the language model. So what that means is the more value they're getting, the more you're paying OpenAI. And so there's a bit of a trade-off here. We're like, well, they're using my platform and they're getting a lot of value out of it, but I'm paying a lot more because of that value. So many companies, many SaaS applications are now capping. They're saying you got to pay for credits, and that's a way of guarding against, a runaway train of usage that at the end they're gonna end up paying for. So, but that's the extent that we've looked at those models. But mainly the commercial side, we've looked at OpenAI and their models, and on the open side, we've looked at a number of them, trying to do our own assessment and verification that the results it's producing are within the realm that was acceptable.
No, that's great. It is interesting to pose essentially the same prompt to these various models and just to see what differences there are. I mean, I do that on occasion just out of curiosity, and for whatever it's worth, I do find that the OpenAI responses, I find those to be at least the ones that I like the most. So
I'll be honest, I have not played around too much with the other ones. I've seen people doing that, and I just didn't have a need for it.
Sure.
With only 24 hours in a day, I haven't played around, and I'm already doing a lot. But I'm with you that I tend to find what GPT-4 produces is certainly good enough, and it's been really valuable. But you're right also to say that the verification and checking the difference between the responses is something that anybody building software on these language models ought to be doing, whether it's looking at just what OpenAI produces or comparing against other models. You have to do some type of verification that the responses are correct, that the responses are matching if you're comparing the output of two models. We actually were working on that, doing this kind of verification to check that the lower cost model is producing, the similar or at least incorrect results
Right.
that the larger models do. You have to do that.
So for companies that are, looking to implement this, I mean, so what are some of the challenges that they might face in doing so?
Well, it's a good question. One of the issues that many people hear about is this topic of hallucinations, right? Where models, sometimes if you ask them a question, the answer should be, I don't know, but it starts telling you made up information, right? In fact, there was some news, a couple months ago where a lawyer ended up, I'll say allegedly, allegedly using ChatGPT to write some information that went into his brief into the court, and it ended up referring to court cases and prior law that did not exist, prior cases, prior, and he got in a lot of trouble, and then he was, allegedly lying to the judge and so on. So there's a lot of, you have to be careful with the hallucinations. And now in that case, he was asking, it was making up things, and he thought that it would have the information. He thought that it was trained on that information. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But the problem with neural networks and these language models is that we do not necessarily have a good insight into the inner workings of the neural network. It's weights and biases. And it's hard to say, as you would in code, that, there's the bug, that line of code. Right? You can't do that in a large language model. So the question is then, well, what do you do to guard against these hallucinations? And I think there's a couple different paths. One of them is you just run your own testing a lot, and you try to use some statistical way to measure that, hey, the responses I'm getting are correct. And we were doing that. It was just a manual process. You just push through it and you start asking questions. We put in a textbook worth of information that was accessible by the AI, and then we start asking questions from different pages of the text and seeing the response, and just comparing and saying, was that correct? Did it include the right information, all the information? And then you have to go to the negative space too and ask questions that aren't in the book and see what it says, right? Does it come back with, that's not part of the corpus of text, or does it make things up? Or does it answer from what it knows external to the text, which may be okay, or maybe not, depending on your software application. From a practical standpoint, one of the other issues is just getting the data in the right format, because language models, chat models, they usually reply in text. Now, OpenAI was addressing this more recently, but I can tell you, earlier this year, if you asked it to output some information in a table or in JSON format or in some other format, you're really taking your chances that it's going to do it in the right format, and many programs, require the input to be in the correct format. So if you're getting data from the language model, you're kind of just crossing your fingers, like, boy, I hope that it came back in the right format. Otherwise, I got to trap on an error, and I got to go and get some exception code to handle that case. But I think that's gotten better more recently, and I think there's ways to get data out of it, and we're doing that with our product Sinfonia. We were able to get it out of the language model, and I don't think I've seen an error yet where we've gotten bad data out or had to cause problems. The other thing I'll mention is that you can, and I'll take a page from the open source projects that are working on writing code, that are trying to take data from a specification, right? Like Sinfonia or a document, and put it and start to generate the application. I think of it almost like a sieve, or something that something that's trying to hold water and has some holes in it, right? Those holes are the hallucinations. Those holes are, hey, it didn't do the right thing. But if you start layering on top of each other processes that may have their own holes, but they probably don't line up, then the whole thing on the whole will hold water. And what I'm getting at is if you use the language models and you say, I'm going to have you behave as a test engineer, and I'm going to have you behave as a software developer, and I'm going to have you behave as a product manager or a business analyst, you can somewhat guide the model to behaving in that particular manner, and you're overlapping the uses of the model. So you may be calling it more than once on the same set of information, but looking at it from different perspectives. And so any gaps in the reasoning can sometimes be discovered by the same model behaving as a different type of person, having a different persona, right? And that's how I've seen some of these applications work. They approach it from different angles and kind of layer the usage of the same language model, right? And it's almost like write this code, and then you just have it come back and say, now find the bugs.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I found a bug, right? Well, why did you write the bug? Well, why does any developer write a bug? Right? It wasn't on purpose.
Right.
So that's one of the ways that I think you can kind of adjust the methodology a bit to handle some of the challenges of integrating language models in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking. Well, first of all, the persona piece is really important, and I do want you to show Sinfonia, because I want to have a look at that and have you just kind of show us around just a bit.
Sure.
But I think, for instance, like in databases, things of that nature, there's metadata associated with these fields, as an example, right? But what does this field mean? What's it for? And having that really literally spelled out, I think is going to be really important going forward as these things start to go and crawl through all this and essentially read it. So
yeah. The language models are trying to figure out things too, right? And the more I've learned about these language models, and I'm going to say something that there's got to be an asterisk next to it, but the more I look at the language models and I try to think, how are they behaving? I just think about how a human behaves, right? We're defining these language models on neural networks. Neural networks are based on how the brain works. So at least as a high level version of it. So, they found, for example, this was early on, that if you ask the model a question and you get an answer, sometimes it might be right, sometimes it could be wrong. But if you ask it to explain your reasoning as part of the answer, it provided, on the whole, the correct response more often. And it's not unlike when we were in school and the math teacher said, show your work on the test, right? And by showing your work, you're forcing them to not do it in their head and to explain it out. And so I don't think they told us that, but I think the reasoning they probably told us to do that was it would provide a better, it would make us think through the problem, and more often than not, perhaps, do better on the test, get more questions right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see. Can you take us through some of your work here? I think there might be a share button down at the bottom. Do you see that?
Let me see here. Yeah, I'm gonna share. Yes, share presentation. I think that's it. Oh no, not
maybe screen.
I'll just have to share my screen. Okay.
There you go.
I've got a big screen here, so I'm gonna do it. Here we are. And I have it right here. All right. Can you see it now?
There we go. It's
right.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. So this is Sinfonia. Again, this is an application that we've built that is focused on capturing and elaboration of product requirements. The idea is to be the source of truth for product requirements. And so what we can do, I'm going to jump in and just start a new project from scratch. So let's call this I'll just call this a fitness application, right? And we'll start with AI assistance. And so what it will do is ask you for a description of what the product is. Now we have some examples down here, and it just turns out one of the examples is a personal training assistant, right? So I'm going to copy that and paste it up here. But you can literally type anything in here you want, and see how it progresses through the process. This is a wizard right now. It's walking through. So I'm going to go next. And now we're going to look at the types of users. So it's already gone back to the AI in order to understand, I should say brainstorm types of users for this application.
Right.
So a fitness enthusiast, an athlete, weight loss seeker, bodybuilder. So I'm going to cut out some of these just because I don't, bodybuilder, health conscious individual. I'm going to take out athlete. So somebody who's into fitness, we can change these who. So we can just say fitness enthusiast, health conscious. We add in a system administrator because that typically is something you're going to need in an application. The back end is a very important aspect of any web application or mobile application. So now we go next. And at this point, it's going to start thinking about what types of features you might need for this application. So it's using the AI to go do that, and it's coming up with a list. And it didn't take that long to come back and say, well, we want to do, what are some things we want to do? Well, we probably want to do some exercise tracking, right? Record our daily workouts, set personal goals, view progress over time. Yeah, these all look pretty good. And it's given quite a bit too. And in fact, the organization, it organized all these under exercise tracking. And there's ways to go and reorganize these around here, but we can actually do that from within the application. But it gave lots of ideas, and that's the point, right? It's helping to think through what you might need for this. So we're going to just go and finish. And at this point, it's going to show up now in what we call a feature map or a user story map. We have it at 3 levels, and it took the first 2, and what we just saw on the wizard is now been elaborated here, been laid out here. And we can move these around. We can decide that we want to create different types of activities and organize this in a way that is perhaps more understandable to us or to the product team who might be working on this. And we can even come in and say, well, let's look at this particular item, record and track daily workout metrics. And we might want to add a description about why that's important. Or we can actually ask the AI to take a swag at it as well. And this is saying personal trainers need to be actively monitor their students. Yep, that's right. And what we're doing here is we're not trying to take the brain out of the product manager and replace it with AI. But we also know that sometimes it's easier to start from a set of text and edit than to start from a blank screen.
Yep, that's right.
So we can say that, or we can regenerate and try it again, but this is good enough, right? And now it's saved here. And we can go and do the same thing, viewing progress over time. I might want to go and say, for a selected student, set personal goals and milestones. And again, I get for a single student or group of students, right? And you can add more. There's ways to add more. And again, organize this as a product manager might, right? This is a way to capture a scope of information. We can have multiple of these maps, by the way, to organize perhaps in a more like a roadmap. Like here's what we're going to work on now for this first phase. Here's what we're going to work on in subsequent phases. And of course, we can come in and use AI assistants to start elaborating about this particular feature, right? Setting group objectives that can be monitored by the trainer in order to stay tracked. That's fine. And so you can see that what we're doing is we're growing out the specification, right? You may find that, some of these we don't need, and you can get rid of. You can go and delete it. Or you may want to, again, reorganize it in some other way. But at the end, we want the product manager and the product team to have a good view of what is going to be built. And the best way to do that is to elaborate this content so that everybody's looking at the same application's requirements. We can also then go here and say, I've already said that, yes, recording my daily workout metrics and viewing progress and things like that are what I want to do. So now I can suggest sub-items, and I'm going to suggest them for the fitness enthusiast. Okay, this person is the one who is going to be recording their daily workout. And so what are the things that you might need to do there? Well, you probably want to view your current and past workout metrics, maybe enter a new workout, record the time spent, track progress, maybe with visualizations, right? Or setting reminders for upcoming workouts. Now, maybe the reminders doesn't make sense in this particular area. We confirm, and now we're, again, elaborating this section with more tasks to be done, right? We're basically growing the spec. And then, of course, we can come in here, we can add more descriptions, and we can do this over time. So this becomes a way to accelerate the progress of the product manager. And then without going through this whole process, on the demo here, we can export this to
I was
Jira.
about to ask, yeah, you can go open up your tickets, your stories in Jira and get going from there.
That's right.
Wow.
So right now we're exporting this in a more of a manual fashion into a CSV, but our objective is to put this in a place where you could link it right to Jira, right, and have it push out there. And the other thing we're doing is we can export to Markdown. Every bit of this lends itself really well to a Markdown export. And one of the things I'm adamant about with Sinfonia is that many applications try to basically take your data hostage, keep it there, keep them in the application, and I'm not a fan of that. And I want people, if they're going to be working on this and they need to get their data out, I want to make it easy for them to do so. So they can, use it as they need to for their other applications, or just to have a nice looking PDF that elaborates all this information, including the feature map, the descriptions, everything in a format that's easy to read and transmit.
Oh, super helpful. I mean, I've worked with a lot of product owners over time, and to have a straw man, right, just based on an initial idea, for what some people would call an epic or what have you, but right, some idea.
Yes,
that's fantastic. And then to be able to have it, essentially built out, a few layers is really helping. The developers then got to be in heaven, because like, dang, now I got something I can go by. At least I've got a pretty good idea, rather than wondering, okay, so what do you want? I mean, I do some work in Salesforce. I've been doing a little bit more recently, and it's a similar kind of thing. But okay, so what do you want, right? And so as a sales manager, I need to be able to approve discounts so I can manage my margins and quotas and stuff like that.
Right.
Right? Same kind of thing, right? And so to give even those that aren't product owners, right? Even the layperson could come in here and take this and run with it, I think. So,
well, certainly. And these projects are shareable, and you could have the entire team viewing them. One of the problems that we found as we spoke with developers, and look, I've been around the block before, and so is our entire team at Planorama. So we've worked with different development teams, and the one common thing is that developers always go back to the code to see how it's supposed to work. They're not looking at a spec. Why is that? Because the specs are out of date, or they did not capture it at all, or they're in Jira tickets that are, organized by sprint and somewhere out in the ether of the Jira cloud. You can't find it. There needs to be a source of truth to go back to. And if you can have that, now you can navigate around very easily and see how it's supposed to work, especially if we can start drawing connections between this item or these items and the user stories that are related to them, right? And that's where our objective is for Sinfonia, is to capture a lot of that information here. And then you can export to whatever tool you're using, or connect to whatever tool you're using for the project management, for Jira or Trello or whatever one you want to use. But the product specification should exist in a coherent, organized, traceable form. And that's what we do at Planorama for our customers. And that's why we built this tool, so that we could actually do this in the way that we would love to be able to do it for our customers. We use tools that our customers have as part of their, they may be using Jira and Confluence and other ones, that we write organized documentation for them. But we saw that, boy, there are some things we'd love to be able to do to be more organized that just don't exist in the market. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, when some of these stories get buried in the backlog, and you wonder, what did he call that? What was that? Was that ticket number or whatever? It's like,
yeah,
okay, yeah, and I can almost see this as, and looking at it, at the structure, I begin to almost see a schema, in a way. It's just, kind of laid out here. But yeah, this is fantastic.
Well,
yeah, I love it.
Product requirements, one of the things I learned some years ago was that if you think about what product requirements are, and these items on the feature map and user stories and acceptance criteria and test cases and API documentation, it's all a big network. It's all a big graph. Right. All of these things are connected in multiple ways. And so actually, the way that Sinfonia is built, we're built on a graph database, a proper graph database, so that you can manage all those relationships, and you can say, this particular item here maybe is linking to a piece of acceptance criteria somewhere, or this particular item is actually broken out into 3 different user stories, right? And that's completely okay. We're not trying to force, a level of detail here. This is a free form, way to break down problems and to break down features, that are solving problems. But how you connect to different, other different items within the product specification is flexible. And I think it should be, because if you want to navigate around and say, I want to see the user stories for this, you'll be able to click on here and jump to see the user stories, right? Or jump and say, this is a piece of acceptance criteria. Where can I validate that has been taken care of? Oh, okay, right. That was covered in this user story. So there's a lot of interconnectivity here that we anticipated, and that's why it's built on a robust graph database to handle that.
Well, that's great. All right, so I'm going to shift gears just a bit, because
Sure.
Along with living in the development world, you and I have both spent much of our adult life there. I've also been involved in some M&A work.
Yes.
And one of there's a few processes there, but once essentially the go is given to go and check some target out, there's due diligence, and so there's a number of documents, a slew of documents, and a ton of questions that go along with that, essentially attempting to understand what is there, who is there, and so how might this LLM technology aid in getting through all of that, maybe in a more complete and a more efficient manner?
Sure, that's a great question. Part of the value that we at Planorama provide to our clients is surviving due diligence and technical
right.
due diligence at that. And it's because of the type and the amount of documentation that we create for our clients, right? We're writing all the user stories, we're writing all the test cases. They're all interlinked with the designs, with the UX design. Very well organized. And that obviously has benefits for the development team, for the product team as a whole, but for developers, for QA, because we're delivering on the silver platter what they need in order to execute. They're very efficient doing so then. But at the same time, when you're going through due diligence, how nice is it to have all of that information already provided? So again, it's not in a set of Jira tickets that are out in the ether somewhere, right? You have and you can go and say, here are all the epics, the user stories, all the scenarios, all the acceptance criteria, all broken down into very organized documentation. That is I think a tremendous benefit, right? And I think companies will survive due diligence a lot more easily by surprising the person who's coming in, who hasn't most likely seen this level of organization before. That's what we do at Planorama. However, Sinfonia, we're going one step further from that, and it's not built in yet. So I'll say that it's coming soon. but the ability to query the information that is in Sinfonia or even external to Sinfonia in other applications, and using the AI to do that will then allow you to ask questions about certain areas or maybe certain types of users or certain functionality, and have the language model look through all of the data and provide the answers back, right? That is, again, it's more like a ChatGPT style interface, but focused on the data that you have within your project. So, whether you're a developer or a person from the product team, or you're coming in from a technical due diligence team, I think being able to have that interface to query that kind of information shows, very quickly the amount of integrated and internal product documentation that exists, again, to move you through that process, hopefully a lot more smoothly. So that's where we're attacking it from.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I keep thinking about going into that M&A process and like, okay, go read these financial statements and give me some ratios. Just summarize that and give that to me quickly, or go look through any of the agreements. I mean, there's always real estate related things, or there could be like sales agreements or marketing or what have you, right? Essentially partners and stuff, and go summarize that for me and let me know what's what.
That's right. But and the area I didn't mention, or the functionality I did not mention, was providing the source files.
There you go.
So when we're replying back with answers, you remember I mentioned hallucinations before, right?
Yeah, attribution, right?
If you need to go back and check where it came from. So we can provide down to the page number. Say this is the text, and this is the page from this particular documentation, or this is the link to the user story, or this is the link to this document that supports the response that we just gave in the language model. And that's very important, because I still believe in trust but verify to some degree, especially with these language models. Go back and look at the response, say, okay, I think I got what I need, but I want to go and check and make sure that the numbers it gave are correct, and or whatever the information that you asked, and we're going to provide it to you, down to the level of detail that we can. But it's up to the person to then go and validate that themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly what we'd be looking for in that scenario. All right, Matt. Well, let's see here. I'm going to get down here. Last question.
Yes.
So what do you think is next in the evolution of all these capabilities?
That's a good one. I think there's probably a few areas I can talk about that I see on the horizon. One of them is there's these frameworks that have really popped up over this past year that are assisting with using language models. Of course, you can go and get an API key and go hit the OpenAI platform. But you'll find as you start doing that there are some things that you're doing over and over again. There's some needs that you might have that you may have to build yourself. And so some of these frameworks are doing a pretty good job of addressing those repetitive tasks, and even providing a more of a plug-in framework to allow for extensibility. And you don't have to go necessarily directly. You could even plug in your API key for different language models and then access them all through the same programmatic interface. I think that's going to continue, and we're probably going to start seeing some ones bubble up that become the winners, and other ones are going to probably fade off. Just like with the front end framework wars that seemed to happen, years ago, and still happen. Lots of front ends, but certain ones bubbled up and became the most popular, and everybody put their attention on them and building them out. And so I think we might start seeing that same kind of thing happen. But at the same time, some of these frameworks are now focusing on the model where there is an agent that can go and provide information to the language model. And that agent model and providing these tools as plugins now I think becomes very interesting, because language models do a great job at certain things. Sometimes they can do a really good job at reasoning. And I think when it comes down to it, what we end up being most astounded by is not only what it can generate, but how it can seem to reason like a person, right? Now, sometimes it reasons completely wrong and it will justify it, and the justification is completely wrong, but it sounds great.
Yeah,
Right?
some people do that too.
People do that. Yeah, I know. Like I said, AI is not that different from
Yeah, right.
artificial intelligence or actual intelligence. It's all the same acronym, and yeah, people can do the same thing. But for example, early on, it can do a lot of things, but it can't do calculations very well, right? Because the way it's built, it wasn't set up to do math, right? Now there have been ways to work around that, but the best way is to say, "Hey, I detect a math problem. Go get me a calculator." Right? Which is what we do as people, right? There's certain things we can do in our heads, and then other than that, go get me Excel or a calculator. So we're getting a tool and providing these tools to the LLMs and a way to recognize that, oh, this is something I'm not really good at, but I've got a tool that can do that really well. And I'm going to go get that tool, pass in the information, get the result back, and then I'll put it in my text response, right? And at that point, the user has been satisfied that they received the information, but behind the scenes, there were some handoffs going on about who's going to do what. And so the language model sometimes becomes not only the capability that provides the response, but it also provides the reasoning for which other tools to pull in to help me do something, help it do something that it's not necessarily adept at performing or performing well consistently. And I think that's only going to improve. And I think we're going to see more of that. And agents, I think if you start Googling AI agents, you're going to find there's a lot of work being done in that area. And I think rightly so. The other areas I'll mention is probably about multimodal input and output. So right now, we've kind of dropped back to the days of DOS in terms of command line. All doing is typing in questions and getting answers and typing in questions and getting answers. You saw in Sinfonia, right, where we designed the UX so that you're not really typing questions to get things done. It's going and doing it, and the integration is happening behind the scenes. But it's all been text-based, right? What if you can come in and start using your voice and talking with it as a person? And these tools exist separately already. You have the Whisper API that can do, take video and audio and transcribe, and it does a really good job. And then you have 11 Labs that was working on the opposite, type it in, get the voice back. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that integrated in, where you can perhaps sit down and have a conversation with the AI and have it respond back in near real time. And I think that's going to change how people feel about it, right? Typing in something and getting a reply on the screen still feels like war games, whereas like, you want to play games,
Joshua.
That's right. on a 300 baud modem, right?
That's right.
The ChatGPT is scrolling, the text down, right? So it starts feeling like a terminal from back in our days. But when you have the communication and audio, I think people might start having an expectation change and feel more comfortable speaking with it, much like Alexa has provided, right? Where you can ask certain questions. I think things like Alexa will become a little more smart in doing things, and especially when you bundle that with agents that may be able to provide home automation and do certain things for you that are not necessarily canned phrases that you can say. I mean, Alexa does really well, but you have to kind of mold your speech to it, mold what you're going to say. And part of what UX design is all about is molding the interface to the user, and trying as much as you can not to make the user mold themselves to the application. So I think we'll see more of that. And I'm just not talking about audio, but there's also video and other types of way of output. We're already seeing that with Stable Diffusion and other AIs that can generate pictures. It's really exciting, and sound. And there's a whole lot to be done here. And then the third area I'll say is probably more focused models that are perhaps a lot less expensive to run on hardware and more focused on performing certain activities or doing certain types of, like, for example, the AI that's behind Whisper, for doing the transcription. That's focused on performing a certain type of activity and doing it really well. and it reduces the infrastructure cost immensely to do that. You can imagine that as we move into areas like in education and in healthcare and other types of analyses, and of course in software as well, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be value and a large cost reduction, large infrastructure footprint reduction to host those models, and perhaps even they might even work faster because of the smaller footprint that's required to run them. They may even work faster doing whatever activity you have it built for. So those are three areas I would say that we ought to be on the lookout for. And I don't think it's a long bet to see that.
No, fantastic. Yeah, I can imagine speaking. I mean, I can think in healthcare, right? You're speaking to an agent that's essentially doing some initial, I'll just say analysis.
Yes.
But then we get to the days of the Jetsons, right? We can speak to all kinds of things, right? Or it'd be nice to be able to say, hey, turn that down, or, cool this off a little bit, in the car, or, what have you.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to speak as you would to another person. Yeah.
Roy, it's funny you mentioned that. I saw a meme the other day where somebody said that the Jetsons were pretty darn close.
Yeah.
And, the only thing we didn't have were the flying cars, but some of the other capabilities, the speech, the video, we might be pretty close to that, closer than we thought. And the only thing we're missing now is those darn flying cars, but probably better off the way folks drive.
Yeah, it could be the way. So yeah. Around here in Austin, man, it'd be like horrible. But all right. Well, all right, Matt. Well, this has been great. Why don't we just wrap up here and just let people know where they can find you, how they can find you, and I'll be sure and put all that in the show notes.
Oh, sure. So the easiest way to get hold of me is if you go to planorama.design/podcast. And so I have all of my information there to reach me. You can find me on LinkedIn and other places. And if anybody ever wanted to talk about, working together or other ideas, there's even a way to grab a time on my calendar too for that. So certainly happy to do so. But yeah, it's planorama.design/podcast.
Excellent. All right, sir. Well, look, I very much appreciate this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I could sit here all day and chat with you. But
after the call, we might. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well,
it was really lovely. Thank you so much, Roy, for taking the time for bringing me on. I really enjoyed it.
All right, buddy. Hey, well, thank you again, and we'll chat again soon.
Sounds great. You take care.
Thank you for listening to the Accelerating Growth Reg A to M&A podcast. Please share with your colleagues and subscribe, and feel free to contact us with suggestions for interviews or topics that you'd like to hear. We'll catch you on the next one.